And welcome back. We're moving into our first discussion for this morning. We're joined by Honorable Dr. Louis Zabaneh, Minister of State in the Ministry of Education, Culture, Science and Technology, to discuss about the National Curriculum Framework. Minister, good morning welcome to our morning show. It's certainly a pleasure to have you in to discuss something that I think is critically important going forward, particularly in the education sector. There was the launch, but before we jump into the details of what the curriculum framework is all about, let's speak about the process leading up to the launch.
Yes.
What was the timeline like in terms of the development of this framework, and who were the key stakeholders in its development?
Yes, well, thanks. Good morning to both of you. Thanks for having me on this morning. The last time I was here was actually Valentine's Day. I remember because I had on a red shirt, and it was talking about where we were at that point with the process. But good morning to you all and to all viewers here in Belize and around the world. I know you're a very popular morning show, so I want to start off that way. We had the privilege of serving in government starting, as you know, in November of 2020. And our Plan Belize manifesto, one of the main areas is education. You know, Prime Minister Briceño, Minister Fonseca, we're all passionate about education. And we got to work right away. Of course, we're coming in during the height of the pandemic, and so we had to, in a sense, have division of labor. And we had to address the immediate short-term challenges of COVID with respect to the health of our children and protocols in the schools and everybody getting used to hybrid education, etc. I had the privilege of looking more at the medium to long-term issues and primarily, in this case, curriculum. We started consultations in January of 2021, the first phase that went up to August of 2021. During that time, virtually, we met with 18 different stakeholders. So all the main stakeholders, BNTU, we had the managements, we met with the private sector, the NGOs, we met with media, the opposition party. So we met with a broad spectrum of stakeholders. One of the main topics that we wanted to address was, in a sense, the elephant in the room. If we put COVID where it belonged in terms of short-term issues, the long-term developing problem was this issue of overload. That over the years, both the content of the subjects, the outcomes that were expected within subjects started to balloon, and the number of subjects as well. So we had that discussion with the stakeholders, and across the board, everybody agreed. Finally, we are going to address this elephant in this room. So we went ahead and we did a pilot project where we reduced the number of subjects and reduced the number of outcomes. But that was compounded by COVID, so we couldn't do a full quantitative analysis in terms of checking, okay, are the grades of the students improving as we are reducing the number of outcomes and the number of subjects. And because it was confounded by COVID, kids can't go to school, so that is going to adversely affect their grades, etc. Nonetheless, we had qualitative data that said clearly, the teachers were telling us that with less of an overload, bringing it back to ranges that made human sense, that they were able to better serve the students. Because that was what was happening over the years. And imagine that we have teachers who have a certain number of subjects to deliver. They're asked to deliver more subjects. And not just that, but they're asked to deliver more content within the subjects. So that's very stressful to our, has been growing stress for our teachers it causes stress to our students because now imagine they have to finish up their work at home. You have so much hours of homework at night.
Yeah.
The teachers are laboring at night too because they have to try to catch up with their outcomes that they have to deliver, their lesson plans,
Right.
etc. The parents are stressed out because the kids are not doing well. And so we were creating the opposite of what we wanted. Many thought that more meant more outcomes, more subjects meant better performance. But the evidence showed the opposite, that we were actually having falling performance from our students. So we agreed that this was something we had to address. So in the new curriculum framework now has that matter very clearly laid out so that the curriculum writers who are working on, and we'll talk more about that now, will have a clear policy guideline as to how to develop their subjects. So from then, August of 2021, then we moved into the creation of a National Curriculum Steering Committee, Framework Steering Committee. So we got participation geographically from across the country and also from our main stakeholders in the country. And we also got a lot of assistance from our international partners, UNICEF, UNESCO. These entities have been working with us over the years, and we're very grateful to their assistance that they have provided. Local NGOs, other entities, we have like the Love Foundation, we have Pathlight International, they came on board with us. So we invited as much participation as we could have gotten. The steering committee then went to work. We look across the world, looking at best practices, but making it focus on our reality here. We use the UNESCO IBE framework for the development of a new curriculum. And so that is what our framework follows. But it is Belizeanized. It is based on what our experts believe that we need to do going forward. So that their work ended, and I had the privilege of chairing that committee. We handed in our work at the end of May. And since then now we have launched the curriculum last week, no, as you may know.
How does the Ministry of Education expect that their teachers will come in now this September, right? This is, we're not out of COVID, but now we're back in the classroom. After 2 years of essentially hybrid learning, online learning, full of content, not necessarily having standardized examinations and so forth. How are you planning to, as teachers, I guess, motivate these students back into a different reality, into a different habit, because they've been exhausted, you know, all of the, I don't know about you, right, but when my brother come home with a whole bunch of notes, and then when we study, he has no idea what those notes are. He's just writing content because that's what he's supposed to do. So how are you going to now motivate your kids from that kind of environment into what this framework is supposed to do?
So this new year is a transition year. We are focusing on preschool and primary school in terms of getting teachers retrained. So we have a virtual portal that the teachers have been using even over the COVID period, where they can log on and receive specific courses on different topics that will now prepare them. They will learn, for example, well what is competency? Because this moves us now from content to competency, and we need to focus on our teachers in particular to get them where they need to be at in terms of delivering the new curriculum. With the high schools, we have made that voluntary. So they have informed us, the ones that they feel that they're ready to go this year, have informed us. I think out of the 61 or so schools, we have about half of them who have expressed their desire to go full speed ahead. One of the members of the steering committee, Mrs. Salome Tillit, who is the principal at St. Catherine. In fact, they didn't even wait on us. They have
Just jumpstart.
they have been moving like light speed.
Yeah.
And so I want to commend them. And they, not just that, but they have offered to share their experience with all the other high schools who want to move forward. So that is one consideration we gave, that we need, that this is going to be a transition. It's going to be a huge change in mindset in the way we do things. So we can't expect everybody to just start off from scratch and know how to do everything. And so even as we do the transition year, the following years will also be years of improvement as you go along. What we also did this summer to address the short-term issues of learning loss that occurred during COVID was, and we're still engaged in it, is a summer camp, if you will, that program is focusing mostly on literacy and numeracy, and it's from Infant 1 to Standard 2. So those kids, evidence shows that they're the ones, especially at the younger ages, who learn stuff the fastest but lose it as well very quickly if they're distracted with playing games or other things. And so our diagnostic test that we've done shows that many of these kids have fallen back at least a year. And so they need that particular intervention that we're having right now. So hopefully when these kids get back to school, starting now in the new year, they would have caught up on many of these areas. In addition to that, the new framework, as I said, reduces the outcomes and focuses them, reduces the number of subjects, and so now teachers will be able now to have more time. Because we're also assisting with putting up, and this came from them, putting up unit plans on our virtual platform. So instead of them having to spend hours and hours preparing unit plans, that will be available to them. And in addition to that, the assessments that go with the classes that they will be teaching will also be placed on the virtual platform. So again, reducing their busy time, so to speak, on these things that is not rocket science. We get our best teachers to prepare them for us. And now our teachers can start to focus on the children, on what are the needs of the children.
How does the curriculum framework set out to create that paradigm shift in what we would know as the traditional testing methods and the traditional teaching methods to ensure that our students receive that competency-based methodology?
Right. So let me review again what the big change is all about. And I understand from talking with teachers and principals that there have been attempts in the past to move in this direction, but for whatever reasons, they were never carried through. As we know, what we have been doing is focusing on content. So kids go to school, they have a certain number of pages to read, or so much problems to do in math, etc. A lot of it is based on memorization. Then they take a test, and that's how they're graded, and that's how they rank. And then when you see at the end of Standard 6, we celebrate 100 of them or 200 of them out of 5,000, 6,000. When we forget, well, what is really happening with all the rest of our kids. And if you look at the PSC exams, over 40% of them have failing grades over the years. So that has not served us well. That plus the overload that we had compounded the problem. We're now moving to not asking what it is that you memorize in school, but are you able to apply that content to the real world that we live in? So we define competency as a combination of knowledge, which is content, application, skills, and also attitudes and values. So this combination now, this is what we're working on. This is what our teachers will be trained on. how do you assess now that we're not going to be using what we call summative tests, and now we're going to use formative tests. Tests that will tell us, well, where the kids are at a certain point in time and what teachers need to do to move them forward in terms of any gaps that they have. It will be based on mastery of knowledge and the application of that knowledge. So you may have 3 or 4 levels of mastery. You start at the novice level, you go to intermediate until you reach the advanced level. And then you cannot move on to the next level or the next topic until you have mastered this level. This is how teachers need now to be retrained to be able to do that. And we cannot forget that part of that deals with attitude and values. Because you know, if you go and we've done discussions with the private sector, myself coming from the private sector as well, we find that that is a great deficiency many times. Students coming out of our system, they don't know how to work on a team with each other. Even they might have high grades, but they have very poor communication competencies and these types of things. So the National Curriculum Framework lays out our various competencies that we'll be focusing on, and the teachers are now going to be retrained to be able to build those competencies in our students based on this new way of assessment.
You know, I mean, it sounds great, and I know somebody would like exams. I never did well in it, so I applaud it. How is the ministry planning to monitor the curriculum as it goes through, right? Because like you rightfully said, you have to train the teachers in order to. So how are you going to then monitor those teachers to make sure they're following through with the curriculum?
Right, well, you know, the way the ministry is set up, we have district education centers, DECs, in each district, and they have a full staff complement there. So obviously we have started with our own people understanding what competency is all about. Because they're the ones who are charged with monitoring day to day on the ground. We do have a curriculum and assessment unit that they also play a role in ensuring that the assessments that are being used are to standard. When we have to look at the overall system, we have diagnostic tests that need to be done across the system, etc. So it will be a combination of these efforts that need to be made. In addition to that, as maybe I could use this opportunity to tell you where we are right now. The framework is exactly that, a framework. So the framework guides those who are now writing, who have been writing the actual syllabi for the subjects from preschool all the way up. And those are being done by teams of teachers from across the system. So our best teachers in math, our best teachers in English, etc.
So like different working.
They have working groups of 3 to 5 persons, and they're the ones who are actually involved in developing the syllabi for these subjects across the system, right? At this point in time.
In terms of the inclusiveness of the curriculum framework, how does it seek to impact students who are differently able to ensure that their needs are also met?
Right. So if you at the very beginning, when you look at the vision for the framework, it starts out right at the beginning by saying that our new curriculum will be inclusive and will address the needs for special needs students, and also students whose first language is not English. So that is a critical part of what we have now, what the steering committee came up with, what the country came up with, to say that, listen, over the years, we have done a very poor job of addressing our students who have special needs. We have done a very poor job of addressing the needs of students whose first language at home is not English. So you imagine that your language is not English, but you come to school and your teacher is not trained to even recognize how to deal with you, and then you become sidelined, you become marginalized, or you have special needs. They don't know how to diagnose or to identify a child with special needs. And so then they categorize them maybe as a troubled child. And the child gets punished instead of getting the special attention that they deserve. So that is something that the people who we are very grateful for their service on that steering committee have ensured that is an integral part of the framework.
I wanted to kind of take a step back and discuss more about the curriculum itself. So you're talking about changing assessments, changing the way the content is provided and so forth. For the past 2 years, there have been different ways of grading. And, because you can't do the average anymore, right? Are you going back to that system, or are you doing a different way of grading the assessment and the criteria?
Right. So now I think the word balance is very important, right? So there will be some need for memorization for certain things. When you're in primary school, you memorize your times table. When you get to high school, you memorize. If you're in science, you memorize your periodic table and things like that, right? So there's a need for some of that. And so there's also a need for some summative tests that we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. What we're doing is putting it in its rightful place. So instead of summative tests being 100% of all tests, it might end up being, and I'm just pulling that, I don't know exactly when we do the assessment at the end of the year, we'll figure it out, but it might just be maybe 1/3 of the types of tests that we use. But formative tests now will be the ones that will be predominant. So you will have various tables. Maybe you will have a table that you use that has various categories that the teacher will be observing. So you observe the child maybe one-on-one, then you observe the child in a team, and then maybe you do an interview with the child. These are different types of ways of figuring out how much the child has mastered, because now remember, it's mastery. And therefore that a summative test will do a very poor job of determining how well you can apply something, because it's the application of that knowledge. So we're moving now to new teaching approaches, which will include, for example, problem-based learning, or project-based learning, or inquiry-based learning. And what do these mean? It means that you will have a real-world problem, and of course these become more sophisticated as you progress in the system. You will not have children at Infant 2 trying to solve a BEL problem, right? But you might have them in 3rd form or 4th form working with BEL engineers trying to address certain things, right? And so, however, the approach is going to be the same. You have a problem that is identified, and then you have a team that come together. You use the scientific method to go through and determine how you're going to address that problem. You come up with certain solutions that and then you go and make a presentation on the solutions. You get positive critique on your presentation, and there's a learning throughout the whole process. Inquiry-based, project-based, these are the new, they're not new approaches, but they will be new for Belize. They've been used in other places, right? So that combination of new teaching methodologies, training of our teachers, and then also preparing new teaching materials, textbooks that are hopefully going to be more and more written by Belizeans, contextualized for Belize. That's why we say it's a process, and it's going to take a number of years before we fully undertake this framework.
April, this is certainly something I wish would have happened when we were a part of primary school, high school.
I was the problem child. He didn't talk about I met a problem child, and you know,
I was not the memorized.
No, definitely not.
Memorization for me was not my thing. It was being able to apply certain skill sets to be able to accomplish a task.
I don't even think I passed PSC. It's one of those things where you know, you have the kids that fear examinations, not because they don't know the content, but because that is just, they can't do exams.
Yeah.
So I guess I asked about the assessments because now we no longer really have PSC. CSEC and CXC are not mandatory anymore. So how then, for tertiary institutions now, how then are you planning to make sure that, all right, this is the qualifications that they're going to have in order to get to tertiary education?
Right. So again, these are things that we're developing as we go, right? Because we started a conversation with all the teacher training institutions because they will now need to reform their own teaching curriculums so that it is now going to be competency based.
Right.
So in that's part of the discussion with tertiary, but then there's also that issue of, like you correctly said, moving forward. So students will still get grades. They have to meet a certain mastery of that of knowledge, applied knowledge, that they will also be graded on their attitudes, right? So that's going to be important as well. And moving through, when they finish fourth form, they have completed these, or standard 6, they've completed these competency outcomes that have been clearly defined. And then they go forward. And at that point, you will have assessments that are able to state that they're at a particular standard, a particular level, and then once the tertiary institutions understand what that means, then they're able to determine, well, they're ready to come into school.
Right.
So now, for example, those of us who have taught at the tertiary level. That's another story, right? Because I would be in a fourth year class, that the students are getting ready to graduate, say from UB, and they still are not able to write clearly, right? They're still not able to come together and form as a team and make a proper presentation, or much less undertake a project. Now imagine kids are doing this now from infant 1.
Right.
By the time they reach there, you should be proficient at that.
Right.
Right, absolutely.
That should be second nature to you, right? What you have to define your hypotheses, or you know, and
critical
then go
thinking.
and do your research, etc. And until at the end you can have conclusions, but they are based on evidence, etc. At fourth year, in an economics class of all classes, where that has to be the core approach, I have found a lot of deficiencies.
Yes.
Yeah.
So within the tertiary education sector as well, there will need to be that revolution throughout the system. And that's the next area that we'll be tackling.
What are some of the gaps or some of the factors which influence the development of this particular, the key identifiable gaps which influence the development of the curriculum?
Well, what happens, one of them is, for example, communication, that we see that's probably the one that jumps out at you
The most.
right away, right? That students cannot write clearly. And not just that, but if you give them something to read, they cannot comprehend and translate and use, they don't have another area, critical thinking skills. So now that we're already in the fourth industrial revolution, the world, the developed countries and some developing countries are moving there. The third industrial revolution had to do with information technology. And the fourth industrial revolution now deals with robotics and AI and all of these things. We are still struggling to enter the third industrial revolution. So, and our subject content is pre-third industrial revolution. So we have to prepare our kids to live in the real world that is out there, that they will be living in. And that requires that the content itself changes, and that the way teachers learn how to deliver that content changes. So it's a whole complex of things that we're working on simultaneously. So we have persons, for example, working with the teacher training institute that we have. We have persons who are working with the teaching institutions who will be teaching new teachers. So in a sense, maybe that's where we will have a better time of being able to move more expeditiously with this.
Yeah.
The teacher training institutions will have its challenges to deal with the teaching gaps, the gaps that we have in teachers being able to do that.
Right.
Because I hate maybe to give you even more depressing information, but it is something that I want to put in the proper frame. In discussions, consultations with teachers, I failed to mention this. We also had consultations with teachers district to district,
Okay.
from north to south, east to west. And one of the things, obviously, besides the lack of trust that teachers have to the ministry over the years, and especially with the 10% cut and all that, we had to develop get back that trust of teachers.
Right.
Right.
And one thing we said, listen, let us look at ourselves in the mirror. Let us recognize our gaps. Let us recognize our strengths and our weaknesses, and let us work together. Fortunately, I had the privilege of teaching part-time for some of these teacher training institutions. So I knew firsthand it was not something that it was second-hand or somebody says so, where I've met teachers who cannot write.
Right.
Teachers who have poor critical thinking skills. No, it's not the majority of them, I will tell you, but you only need a few of them in the system to be able to cause certain students to even want to drop out of school. So in addition to the students, now we're focusing on the students, and we ask ourselves, well, why do the students have these gaps? Well, part of the reason is that we don't have our teachers fully prepared.
I agree.
When we come to that realization, and we come to it respectfully, I have found that the teachers have said, I am willing, once I get the opportunity to be retrained, I am willing to take that training because my interest is the child. And if I know I can improve myself to improve the child, then I am prepared. And when they were the ones who gave us the suggestion, well, why don't we put up the unit plans, the lesson plans, the assessments? And when they saw that we were actually doing that, and that meant that now they have more time, then they realized that they will have more time to learn these new methodologies that will now hopefully be able to close those gaps that you asked about.
Ooh, Minister, we're running out of time so quickly, and I just want to wrap up with asking, what is the time frame for you to start to make your evaluations and assessments for the, I guess, the probation period, I would say, for
the transition period, the pilot year. So we have, of the 12 members of the steering committee, 2 of them were available became consultants. They know the process. So both Dr. Virus, who is a assistant professor at UB, and Dr. Brown, who was the Dean of the Faculty of Education. Her area of expertise is curriculum. Dr. Virus's area is leadership and assessment and research, etc. They're now working with us. They have their teams of persons working with them, and we are assessing as we go. So that after this first transition year, in fact, every 2 months we get reports on where we are, how are things progressing, so that we could make adjustments along the way. So that is going to be important information coming to us that will help us to refine what we have. But in here, in this document, I will say to you, and this is available on our website, on the government website. You could pull it down. And I also recommend that we also have the Belize Education Sector Plan, which is also on our website. This is the broader plan for all sectors of education. This one is specific to the curriculum. These are available there. But in particular, the framework is a broad guideline It tells us what competencies are all about, what the new teaching approaches will be, how we address the issue of values within the curriculum, and these various topics.
Yeah.
And ultimately, at the end of the day now, it will be for all of us to work together, all stakeholders, because this is a Belizean stakeholder document with partnership with our friends that have been there with us over the years.
Yeah.
So it will depend on all of us continuing to work, building even stronger trust among ourselves to make this successful.
I mean, when it launched, when you have the first few stages after the first semester, the first term, I'd like for you to come back and then we discuss how it's going, right? Because we're out of time, and then they tell me, look at me, a Siviani.
That will be my formative test, right?
Yes.
I will have my own formative test.
Yes, absolutely.
When I say me, I mean the ministry, right? Representing the ministry, of course. It'll be a pleasure to do that.
Thank you so much for dropping in, Doc.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for stepping in and certainly sharing and enlightening us with the national curriculum framework and what we should be expecting in the near future. Absolutely. We look forward to future conversations for sure.
Have a great day. Thank you.
And with that, we are going to take our next break. But before we get into that, we have Phoenix Boutique's Day to Night look. So check it out.
Welcome to the Phoenix Boutique. Today we're getting ready for date night. Here we have our cider white bell sleeve corset chiffon dress, our Zara strap heels, and a Michael Kors wristlet.